Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Anthony Bourke. He comes out of Utah and he is a former military pilot. And what's interesting about him is he gives keynote speeches. He sold his company, he's retired, and he's passionate about entrepreneur. Today, we're going to be talking about Mach 2, leading, executing, communicating, innovating, and leadership lessons. So I'm really happy to have Major Anthony Bourke on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Dr. Lou. Great to be here. And one small edit to your comment. I'm not retired, and I don't really want to retire. I love what I do so much. I hope I can do it for the next 10 to 20 years. You are right, though. I did sell that company, and I've been involved in selling a couple others. So we can talk more about that later.
Yeah, and also we'd like to keep this podcast informal, so please call me Chris. I hate the doctor title.
You got it. And you can call me
Yes,
AB. Most people do.
excellent. AB. So, kind of talking about your journey, in a nutshell, what you do, how you got there, and I'm excited to delve into the conversation.
Yeah, my journey. Geez, I grew up in a little town called Palo Alto, California, well before the invention of the silicon chip. Although I did have a neighbor named Bill Hewlett just down the street who started a pretty cool company called Hewlett Packard. But I grew up as a normal kid with a dream, and my dream was I wanted to be a fighter pilot. In fact, by the time I was probably 16 years old, the dream was even more formed. I was dreaming of becoming a 35-year-old F-16 pilot in the reserves, a United Airlines captain based in San Francisco, and a bachelor. I thought that would be the ultimate life. And it's good to have a plan. Sometimes they don't work out exactly as you hoped, but mine worked out pretty well. I went to UC Berkeley for college. I graduated. I joined the Air Force. I flew F-4 Phantoms on the active duty. And then after a couple years, I was lucky enough to get hired to fly F-16s in California, my life dream in beautiful Fresno, California. I was married. I'd had my first child, and the airlines wouldn't hire me. And that wasn't because I was a bad human being or a bad guy. It was because at that time I had about 1,000 hours of flight time, and they were looking for people with about 3,000 hours of flight time. But as I said, life takes a funny twist, and it was probably the luckiest thing that ever happened because it forced me to kind of get involved in starting and building a number of different businesses. And so the first one we got involved in starting was I opened the regional branch for a mortgage bank called Weyerhaeuser Mortgage in the Central Valley of California. I loved that. I don't know why I ever left it because it was very good to me. I became their top producing mortgage banker in the Western United States. But somehow after about 3 years, I got lured into another startup, not particularly sexy. This was a family-owned paint manufacturing business out of Commerce, California, basically Los Angeles. And this family wanted to crack the Home Depot account. They wanted to sell their paint through Home Depot. And so they hired me and actually another fighter pilot to help them do just that. And we were pretty successful. We ultimately landed our paint. We had 40 feet of space in every Home Depot west of Minneapolis, which when I left was 420 stores and about $70 million of revenue. So that was rapid revenue growth, rapid expansion, lots of hiring, lots of strategy, and really executing it against that strategy. And it was a heck of a fun ride. But what I started to realize from all this was that everything we were doing to essentially grow our business, to train our people, to execute, and really to win was kind of the same thing I was doing in my spare time, if you will, flying F-16s. And so we thought, geez, maybe we should start a management training company around these concepts. And because we had a relationship with the Home Depot at that time, we pitched this concept to the Home Depot. They hired us to put on our first seminar, as I said, way back in 1996. It was a full-day program. They loved it. And the head of HR came to us afterwards and said, this is the best seminar training program we've ever done. I'm so excited. I want you to train all 2,500 of our store managers this year. And I think the rest of corporate America needs to hear your message. I'm going to call the Wall Street Journal and tell them about what we've experienced. So you talk about kind of a rapid ramp. At that time, you may remember 1996, there was no internet. We did not have an 800 phone number. I'll take that back. There was an internet, but it wasn't very robust. So we didn't have a website. We didn't have an 800 phone number. We had a little office in my partner's basement up on a lake in northern Georgia. When that article came out, he was on a fishing trip in Guatemala. He had a little 16 message answering machine on his desk in his quote office. And when he came back from that fishing trip, well, the article came out in the Wall Street Journal. It was a half-page story on the front of the marketplace section of the Wall Street Journal talking about fighter pilot principles applied to the world of business. And as you can imagine, when he came back from that trip, there were 16 messages on that answering machine. So that was the beginning of our business, which was called Afterburner Seminars. And we grew that pretty dramatically over the course of the next 11 years. We got to a point where we were probably putting on 300 programs a year, interactive team building programs, half day, full day, multi-day team building programs, keynote speeches, corporate coaching and consulting, all around this idea of flawless execution. Anyway, I served as CEO and president of that company for many years until I sold in 2007, had a non-compete for 2 years. And then in 2009, when that non-compete went away, I started this current business, which is called Mach 2. And that may be even more than you wanted to hear, but I'll just stop right there because that's kind of my journey.
Yeah, really interesting. And so kind of moving into the conversation, you talk about Mach 2. I mean, I'm not a military, I have no experience in the military. I've heard it, in the movies, but what is Mach 2? And talk about, leading, executing, communicating, innovating. We have around 7 minutes. So kind of, if you can condense it.
I'll try to be concise. It's not my specialty. Mach 2, I named my company Mach 2 because Mach 2 represents twice the speed of sound, which is essentially about 1,500 miles an hour or 20 miles a minute. And that's as fast as I've ever gone in an airplane. Usually you go Mach 2 when you're in a real hurry. And in most cases, it's because you're running away from somebody. I also thought of it as Mach 2 because it was kind of my second engagement or my second go at this world of keynote speaking and corporate training. So a little bit of a dual entendre. Today, I speak about 40 to 50 times a year at corporate meetings and events. And as you said, on a variety of subjects. But as you said, I have speeches around leading at Mach 2, executing at Mach 2, communicating at Mach 2. And these ideas are just, essentially, how is it that fighter pilots achieve peak performance, drive better results, execute and win in a very rapidly changing environment flying jets? And how can business people, how can organizations out there in the world use some of these same tools and techniques to improve their leadership, their teamwork, their communication, their discipline? And now I speak quite often about improving safety, whether it's patient safety in the healthcare world or whether you're on a job site at ExxonMobil or on a construction site or even in the world of tech. So I cover a wide range of products, all based on fighter pilot principles and military leadership principles.
Yeah, that's a really great, segue. And so, kind of talk about when you say communicating, innovating, and leading at Mach 2, what does that look like? And I'm just kind of, because, the speed of sound, but, what do you, like, how does this apply to, innovation and leadership and communications?
Yeah, I talk a lot about what I call as a feedback loop of regular briefing and debriefing. I know you're a former doctor. Briefing and debriefing is probably something you're very familiar with, but let me talk about it for a second from a fighter pilot's perspective, and let's see how it applies to the world of business. Because at least for fighter pilots, when we talk about this idea of briefing, we essentially say, you may be the best and the brightest fighter pilot in the world. You could have the greatest ideas or tactics or plans in your head. But if you haven't found a way to communicate your great ideas, your great plans to the people who are flying with you, or of course, in the world of business, the people who are either working for you or with you, then all of your ideas will be for naught because you'll be flying solo and so will your wingman. And that's why when fighter pilots get ready to fly any kind of mission, whether it's a 1-hour training mission or a 6-hour combat mission, even though we've been preparing for hours for our missions, or just like so many of your listeners, in so many cases, you've been preparing for days or even weeks for your missions, just before we get ready to take off, or better put in the language of business, just before you get ready to execute your day, your week, your key customer meetings, projects, and events, fighter pilots always sit down and hold a briefing to ensure that when we walk out the door, jump in our cockpits, put on our helmets, and start engines, that we are going to be aligned, that we're going to be flying in formation, that we're going to be executing at the highest possible level. And I think in both of our worlds that the mission is going to be safe. So I love talking to business people about the power of briefing, how fighter pilots use briefing to make sure the team's aligned, flying in formation, executing at the highest level, and bringing everyone home safely, and show business people how they can use some of those same techniques. And then I like to talk about this idea of debrief. And debrief essentially says, you know what? I really don't care how good we think we are. I don't care how well we planned. I don't care how good our technology is. And I really don't care how well yesterday's mission went. The fact is, at the end of the day, at the end of the mission, no fighter pilot has ever flown the perfect mission. And I think it's probably fair to say that none of your listeners are ever going to have the perfect day, the perfect week, the perfect customer interaction, the perfect project, the perfect event. And that's why when fighter pilots are done executing our missions, we always, always, always call timeout and hold a debrief. So we can learn from both the mistakes and the victories of today's mission, and we can continue to improve as individuals, certainly as a team, but maybe most importantly, so that as leaders, we can find a way to call time out from time to time, not all the time, but at the appropriate time, close the door, pull the name tags off the chest, pull the rank off the shoulders, create a safe environment where our people will give us the honest feedback we need to keep us ahead of the threats, ahead of the competition, and ahead of the change that will continue to come our way. So when you talk about companies that are trying to innovate, that are trying to execute at a higher level, this idea of driving a culture of continuous improvement in your business is something that's worked for me as a fighter pilot, but it's also helped me evolve and build at least what I think were a number of great businesses.
Yeah. And how can people find out more about you and follow you and reach out to you?
So I hope you can see on the screen, my last name is spelled Bourke, Bourke, and my company website is mach2consulting.com. Mach, of course, is spelled M as in Mike, ACH, the number 2, consulting.com. And that's probably the easiest way to find me. I mean, I'm certainly on most of your social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, even now TikTok. I'm getting hip. So I'm not that hard to find.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this conversation. And for all the audience, let's thank AB for coming on and sharing his wisdom. And be sure to give his socials a like and follow. And thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, Chris, really nice to meet you. And thanks for having me.